This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream. As you might already know, China lends a lot of money. As American and European enthusiasm for international development has waned, China has happily stepped in to become by far and away the world's largest single creditor to developing nations, coming as part of Xi Jinping's landmark Belt and Road Initiative. While this might have originally looked like a good idea, as the global macroeconomic outlook has deteriorated, a lot of these countries have started defaulting on these loans, and China is now sitting on literally billions of dollars worth of bad loans. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at China's overseas debt crisis, why it looks like it'll probably get worse, and how it might be solved. So let's start with a bit of context. As we mentioned at the top, China does a lot of lending, especially to developing countries. It's hard to measure precisely because the Chinese state lends through a variety of semi-national banks and obscure financial entities, but by most estimates, China is the single largest creditor in the world. China's lending is disproportionately directed at low-income countries. Chinese lending to the 74 countries classified as low income by the World Bank is bigger than all other bilateral lenders combined. A lot of this lending comes as part of Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative, first announced in 2013 and otherwise known as the BRI. The BRI is a truly massive project, involving over $800 billion worth of loans and infrastructure projects spread across the developing world. Now, in principle, the BRI is a great idea. Infrastructure projects are often a really great investment for developing countries, and successful BRI projects include new hydropower dams in Uganda, a new network of gas and oil pipelines in Central Asia, and a 750-kilometer railway from Addis Ababa to Djibouti. China's willingness to lend loans of cash and help with construction won them serious political capital in the developing world, which is why both the EU and the G7 have since announced their own versions of the BRI in the form of the Global Gateway and the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, respectively. Anyway, while the BRI is a clearly good idea in principle and has done some good things, China was probably a bit too aggressive with their lending. Various low-income countries have ended up defaulting or restructuring their high-interest Chinese loans, and local politicians have often ended up scrapping the projects to avoid accusations of excessive dependence on China. The default rate jumped in 2020 and 2021, thanks to COVID, with the total amount of loans requiring negotiation jumping to about $52 billion in the last 2 years. Most of these non-performing loans were in sub-Saharan Africa, which is particularly reliant on Chinese lending. According to analysis by Rhodium, this sharp deterioration means that some $118 billion of Chinese overseas loans have come under renegotiation since 2001, amounting to about 16% of the total extended. To make matters even worse, China has also had to give out so-called rescue loans to keep debtor countries financially afloat. Sri Lanka is a great example of this. China lent $4 billion to Sri Lanka, a lot of which has been directed at BRI projects. Not all of these projects have gone swimmingly. The Sri Lankan government ended up granting a 99-year lease to a Chinese company for the strategically significant Hambantota port as part of a debt restructuring, and the 350-metre-high Lotus Tower in the capital Colombo suffered lengthy delays and various allegations of corruption. However, when Sri Lanka's national finances started going belly up, China realised that if it wanted to keep the BRI going and its control over Hambantota port, it would have to keep the country afloat. China realised that if Sri Lanka's economy collapsed, that would almost certainly mean political collapse and the removal of the ruling Rajapaksa family, who have proven remarkably keen for Chinese credit, thereby jeopardising BRI projects in Sri Lanka. This is why the CCP sent billions of dollars over the past 5 years or so, including a massive $1.5 billion swap facility from the PBC, trying to keep Sri Lanka's economy afloat. It's a similar story in Pakistan, which recently received yet another $2.3 billion lifeline from a consortium of Chinese banks. Analysis by Aid Data suggests that China had provided so-called rescue loans to not just Sri Lanka and Pakistan, but also Argentina, Belarus, Egypt, Mongolia, Nigeria, Turkey, and Ukraine, all countries rated junk by mainstream credit agencies. You get the idea. As well as having to restructure its loans, China has also had to bail out debtor countries, which costs a lot of money. Unfortunately for China, things only look to get worse. As global credit conditions deteriorate, sovereign defaults and the political chaos that often accompanies them are only going to become more likely. This is already happening in Zambia, which owes somewhere between 25 and 50% of its public debt to China, defaulted at the end of 2021, and Sri Lanka defaulted for the first time in its independent history in May of this year, with the government collapsing 6 weeks later. According to analysis by The Economist, 53 countries are currently at risk of default, and many of these countries, especially those in Africa, also owe substantial debts to China. Similarly, the OECD estimates that a majority of BRI countries are at high risk of default, with 52 BRI countries at the highest economic risk level. Worryingly, there's no obvious resolution to the coming debt crisis. The IMF's infamous reputation for punishing austerity conditions means that many of these countries don't want a bailout, and multilateral debt restructurings are always difficult. As a final thing, some commentators have tried to blame China for the current debt crisis. They argue that China deliberately overburdens countries with high-interest loans so it can use debt restructuring negotiations to wangle strategic concessions, like the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, in a process known as debt trap diplomacy. It's a common talking point amongst US politicians, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz even suggested as much in May, when he claimed there is a really serious danger that the major debt crisis in the global south will stem from loans that China has granted worldwide. However, analysis by both the Rhodium Group and the Centre for Global Development of all China's loan restructuring shows that, in the vast majority of cases, loans were either written off or deferred. And today, China looks less like a Machiavellian mastermind and more like a naively optimistic creditor, struggling to collect its loans. Similarly, while it's true that Chinese lending is often at a higher rate than other countries, in retrospect, this looks appropriate given the high risk of default. The point we're making is that accusations of debt trap diplomacy are mostly unfounded, which is why the coming debt crisis is bad news for China and the BRI. If the global economy continues to deteriorate, China won't be debt-trapping developing countries into giving their strategic infrastructure. Instead, it'll probably have to write off a ton of non-performing loans, possibly jeopardizing the BRI as a whole and exacerbating China's current economic crisis. If you want more from TLDR, then you should head over to Nebula, the streaming service we built with our creator friends, and where you'll find exclusive TLDR videos like these and all of our videos ad-free. If you're interested, I have good news, because we've partnered with CuriosityStream, the home to the best documentaries online. Thanks to them, you can get both streaming services, CuriosityStream for the docs and Nebula for bonus TLDR, for less than $15 a year. That's a wild deal, and a 26% discount on their already low price. So get yourself a ton of documentaries and exclusive content from your favourite creators, including the Daily Briefing Extended Edition, by signing up using the link below. Thanks for your support.